Hello, friend.
Hey, how's it going, man?
I need to ask Mike, does anybody really know what time it is? Does anybody really care about field timing?
They don't care until it falls apart.
It's
They
like
get all irate.
in the moment.
Yeah, in the moment, everything's great
So
till it's not.
I just threw a term out and I don't even know what we're talking about. Field
Oh,
timing. What
field
is
timing.
what is field timing?
Well, it's kind of like the sound man at church. If everything goes right, then you don't notice the sound man. If one thing goes wrong, then everyone turns around and looks at the sound man.
Right.
Okay. And field timing's a lot like that. And I don't think I've ever judged a contest where at least 30% of the bands didn't have phasing or a tear in the tempo somewhere in their show. So it's something we've got to really kind of think about,
A tear in the
a
tempo.
tear in the tempo.
Wow.
That's a
Because
sexy term, isn't it?
well, I'm fixing to blow that away because I got to be honest, when you said somebody had asked you about field timing, I was thinking about, okay, well, it's pretty obvious. You've got 5 minutes to get your stuff out on the field. You've
Hmm.
got 2 minutes to get everything set. You've got an 8 minute show. Why is field timing hard? Why would somebody ask you about that?
Well, that question has come up. I want offside. You can edit this out if you need to. But I had a band director bring their band over to clinic for me to clinic them at my high school, and they ran their show, and it was 2 minutes too long.
Oh wow.
So I was timing it because I always time them the first run through,
Sure.
and I go, "Okay, contest is in a week, and you're going to lose a rating because your show is 2 minutes too long on the field because they were playing things slower." But
Right.
so field timing in that regard does get important, but usually it's pretty obvious. Field
But that's
timing for us, go
not what
ahead.
we're talking about, right?
Not what we're talking about. We're
Okay.
talking about keeping the ensemble playing at the same time. Where when you're in the press box, you hear everything at the same time, so you don't hear the difference of where the beat falls from side to side or front to back or
And I think you've already used a term that I'm more familiar with, phasing, where
phasing.
it sounds
Yeah,
like this band is playing at one tempo or at a different, not necessarily different tempos, but they're playing at different times.
at different times,
Yeah.
and sometimes different tempos. I mean, don't
Sometimes.
all kinds of stuff happen. Feet are going everywhere. Kids are falling down. I don't know. It just becomes the apocalypse of marching. So you have to be careful. It just keeps getting worse. It's like watching a car wreck in slow motion.
And on your adjudication, you say, well, that was something.
Out of all the bands I've heard and seen, you're one of them.
You're one of them.
And I
Today.
can say that by laughing because I've been there. I've been on the sideline with my band marching going, oh, yeah.
Okay. So now that you've explained it to me, are there cause and effect? Everything's cause and effect. Are there pretty
Yeah.
simple causes? Are there pretty simple fixes? Or is it something that we need to do some analyzation? Talk to me. Tell me how to
Yeah, a
fix it.
little bit of all of that. A lot of the stuff that I have in this podcast are things I've used in my own band program, and I give credit to Bill Bachman, Bachman. He was probably still is a really great educator. I just haven't seen him past his video. He's with the Cadets, the Blue Knights, Carolina Crown, percussionist, and he has an excellent video, and it's going to be linked in the Intune page for me, where you can click on it, or if you just literally on YouTube put Bill Bachman field timing, enter, it'll bring it up. He's
Okay, let me
standing
do
on the
this.
field with a blue T-shirt on.
Do this before you move on. If you are listening, don't try to write this down while you drive. Just reference it later. Intunemusic.com. That's IntuneMusic.com/ask Mike, all one word. That's where you'll find this link. And, or as he said, on YouTube, look up Bill Bachman.
Yeah, Bill Bachman,
Okay.
field timing, and it'll bring it up. Okay. So what we have to do, we've got to figure out educating the students that, the speed of sound, even though it seems really fast, 767 miles per hour. You know what I mean? That's pretty incredible if you think about it when you break
Right.
the sound barrier. But on a marching field, it really does make a difference. There's a difference, and light for us, our purposes, is instantaneous.
Right.
The speed of
Visually, we
light.
see things immediately.
Yeah, just like when you're on a gun range and shooting long distance, if you can see the puff of smoke, and then you'll hear the sound.
Right.
Then you'll hear the sound, or you'll watch the ping, and then you'll hear the ping, kind of thing. So the same thing sort of happens, and it does happen in field timing. So what we do is we talk to the kids about every note they play is like throwing a tennis ball at the speed of sound. And all those tennis balls, we've got to figure out how to make all those tennis balls, front ensemble, woodwind brass, tubas, wherever we're at on the field, all the tennis balls hit the press box at the same time. And that what makes it hard is not necessarily you'd think, well, that's fast, the speed of sound, but it's the difference of trying to convince ourselves what to listen for because all our tennis balls hit the same, but I might sound like I'm playing behind the people who are 40 yards to my right or the 40 yards to my left. So we've got to really teach those kids and give them examples on how to do that.
Okay, I have a question for you. This is my weird brain as it goes. You know, in they taught us in physics that if you drop a bowling ball and you drop a feather, they fall at the same rate. Percussive sounds versus band sounds versus do they does all sound travel the same speed? It seems obvious, but I'm still going to ask.
I don't know the exact answer to that,
But you know
but
what I
for my
mean?
purposes, it does. Yeah,
Okay,
a snare hit and a flute note travel the same. The biggest difference I find in field timing is the bell front instruments. Their sound is directional. Where a
okay.
snare drum, it goes 360 degrees around the
Which,
kid,
which
and
is
that comes into
so
play.
obvious when you see a band turn towards the away stands and you don't hear them very well, and then they turn back around and they blast. That's the
Yeah,
directional
because
that
it's
you're talking about.
yeah, all that sound is pointed straight at you. So we do a few things to kind of help the kids understand it. One is I'll put my battery after we kind of learn parts of the show. My battery, put them on the middle of the field. Then I'll take half my woodwinds and brass and put them on the front sideline, and the other half of the woodwinds and brass and put them on the back sideline. So now they're technically 160 feet apart from each other.
Okay, got it.
Woodwind brass with percussion in the middle. Then we have the percussion start us with clicks, just click, 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 click. And then we have the kids on the back play according to what they're hearing from the drum line. They do it. Then we ask the kids at the front,
Right.
were the percussion and the backfield woodwind brass, were they together? And they'll say, yes, they were. Like, oh, that's interesting. So they were together, were they? Said, yeah. Okay. All right. Let's reverse that process. Okay. Now let's bring those backfield kids up to the front of the field, like up in the stands, and then let's do it kind of the opposite way. Let's have the percussion start. Now the kids in the front sideline play along with what the percussion do and see how that relates. And things get real convoluted. You know what I mean? Because it travels and then all of a
Right.
sudden the sound goes backfield and sound comes back. So and the simple rule is if the percussion, if you can draw a line from the percussion battery to your position on the field to the press box, there's almost never any problem because all those tennis balls kind of catch each other as they go forward and they all hit the press box at the same time. But if you have the people at the very front of the band watching the drum major and staying right with the drum major and the drum line's playing according to the drum major, then the people at the front, their tennis balls are going to hit the press box first. So it's going to be that patum, 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 instead of
Right.
thump, where it all hits at the same time. So there's a lot of, I guess, geometry involved in figuring it out. But it's really important because I hear it all the time. I hear the
Right.
mistake all the time, and I'm thinking to myself, do they really know how to fix this? So hopefully with this podcast we can give you some exercises to fix it. The other one we would do is just from my old Skyrider horn instructor John Simpson. We'd put the percussion in the middle of the field and make a circle around them, and then we'd play a part of the show. Then we'd all take like 8 steps back away, so make the circle bigger. Then we'd play it again, play it again, play it again, play it again. Now granted, if you were standing where the percussion are, it made sense because all the tennis balls hit the percussion and the percussion hit the woodwind brass at the same time. That works. Here's the problem. If you're on this end of the circle, have to look at the screen, this end of the circle, then the kids on the other end of the circle sound like they're about a half beat behind.
Right.
Think about that. So what we're doing is we're training their ears and their brains to realize that they're getting sonic information that is not usable. What do they listen for? So, and that depends on where they're at on the field. So you've got to delineate in your show exactly who they listen to, when do they listen to them, and where are they on the field. And those rules change as they move on the field because we do drill. So once they figure all that out, then it will work great. Okay. It'll work great. Okay.
Okay.
Um,
But so essentially, you have to convince the kids to reject certain feedback that they're getting.
yes. And I know you do some announcing. And
Some,
I
yeah.
even like with my PA system in band when I clinic or did my own band, there's a certain skill necessary to be able to talk into a microphone, but yet hear your voice
Delayed.
half a second later
Yeah.
while you're still talking. At first, it makes your brain explode. It does.
Right.
But after a while, you get used to it. And we have to get the kids used to that. They have to know what to listen for and what to ignore.
So I never by diagnosis, but am probably quite a bit ADHD. And my problem is I listen to everything, and every source of input that comes to me is something I try to. What's going on? The squirrels are everywhere.
Yeah.
And there is a certain skill to be able to, as you say, if I'm announcing a contest and I have the window open in the press box, to totally disregard my own voice coming back at me. And
Correct.
it's usually more like a full second.
Yeah.
And, if you aren't concentrating on what you're doing,
Mm-hmm.
you'll stop and go, and it's a
Or
negative.
something as simple as getting them to ignore the sound of the percussion ricocheting off the stands
Right.
back to you, kind of like what you're talking about, and listen to the actual percussion that are behind you on the field in this case.
Yeah. We did a podcast on festivals, and one of the advantages is knowing the environment you're going to be in. But this same conversation now, when I was growing up in West Texas, there was a stadium. It was Barrett Stadium in Odessa, Texas, and there's like an 8-foot brick wall right in front of you if you were on the field. And when you would play, the instant slapback or the instant echo coming off that wall would totally throw you off if you've never had our director had to say, this is what's going to happen.
Right.
This is what you're going to hear.
But does it make
Ignore it.
sense to put them in situations at home where the same thing happens?
Well, that's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
But what you're doing now is giving practical application. So no matter where they are, they know what they're listening for or keying off of, if I can use that terminology.
And it's not easy.
Okay.
It's kind of easy to teach it. It's hard for them to understand it because they're fighting their natural music tendencies that you've just lovingly beat into them for years. Always listen and stay with your own. Lovingly beat into them that you tap your foot and you stay with all the people around you and you use your ears. You listen, you listen, you listen. And now we're going, don't listen. Don't listen to this. Listen to this. Or don't listen at all. Just watch the drum major and play with what the drum major does. Or don't ever watch the drum major if you're in front of the numbers. So they got to know the rules, so almost like they just have to close their eyes if they're right in front of the drum major. Because if they play according to what the drum major's giving them, they will be a half beat ahead for the rest of the band.
I'm having a sudden Morpheus moment in the band world. What if I told you?
Yeah, what if I told you? The same reason why our front ensembles, when they are legitimately in the front of the band, they never watch the drum major.
Wow.
Never, ever. They're waiting for the sound of the battery percussion or the band on the field to hit their ears, and they key into that.
It's so contrary to what logic would dictate.
Oh, yeah. And I'll tell you, with our generation, remember how we started with whistles?
Right? Tweet.
Yeah.
Tweet.
You can't do that anymore. The shows are too sophisticated. It kind of worked for us back in the day because we kind of crammed all together. But, the drum major has to start. The snare player, center snare, is watching. The drum line comes in right on the drum major. And if you watch him carefully, you'll see him go, dut, 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 dut. And they'll pause just a microsecond. 1, 2, 3. They're waiting for the snare, for the battery sound to hit them. Because if you blow a whistle and they start playing according to the whistle, automatically we're a quarter step apart from each other on the metronome.
Gosh, man, you're just kind of throwing me for a loop here because if
the old ways don't work anymore.
Right. And
yeah,
you gave me a number one time. We never in the 70s probably marched more than 120 beats.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. So now you start your opener at 170.
So at the beginning of your move to the end of your move, you've probably had to adjust your listening.
Yes.
Depending on how far you went.
That's right. Kind of like passing the basketball on the court. That's what I tell them. It's like passing that basketball on the court. When you pass this line when you go across the numbers going backfield, then all of a sudden you switch to watching drum major. And then if you get in front of the numbers, you switch immediately to only listening to percussion or whoever's been assigned, whoever you've told them to listen to. But it takes time to break it down and tell them what they have to do. Okay.
Man, you got me going. So would it behoove us to consider where our percussion is at all time?
Oh
and
God,
not
yes.
move them all over the field?
Yeah. Most of the time when I hear it, and we'll go to our beautiful DCI friends.
Okay.
They'll sit there and put the battery on the 10-yard line, backside line, and they'll play. See, those kids are, for the most part, college kids. They're very well trained musicians. They can do that. Then all
Right.
of a sudden, I'll see a band where they'll put the percussion on the 20-yard line. And let's say the tubas and low brass are on the other 20-yard line. And then
Oh,
they're sitting there wondering, why are we phasing?
what's going on?
Well,
What
why is
happened?
there why is the tempo tearing here right here? Well, it's because the low brass is listening to the percussion. So if you can think of the geometry, they hear the percussion play coming at them
60
80
yards.
yards,
Yeah.
60 yards. Yeah, 60, you're right. 60 yards. Then they play according to the percussion. So then all their tennis balls hit way after the battery tennis balls hit the press box. So
Right.
it's this constant vicious cycle of takum, 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 takum. And then all of a sudden the feet go crazy and, you know,
That's almost Pythagorean theorem there,
oh, yeah, yeah. Yeah.
because you
In
got to
fact,
figure
there's
the
a,
line across the field and then consider both lines to the press box.
I tell you, there's another name to remember for those
Okay.
guys out there, Andrew Rogers. And
Okay.
we'll link his deal in there too. He did a like a CAD program calculator kind of thing. Let's see if I can find one. I know this isn't the best way to do it, but just to show it up here like this.
Okay.
And you see where the dot is in the middle?
I do.
Okay. The dot in the middle is what I chose as the center of tempo. Then everything that's like this looks like a weather map, doesn't it? Then everything shaped here is in the safe zone. They
Because
just
of the
have to
line
listen
to
to
the press
this.
box. Right.
Yeah, and everything here is kind of sort of safe. Anybody outside that in the darker part, they are not in the safe zone. They cannot listen to the battery percussion. They have to
Okay.
watch the drum major. Okay. And so you can literally take this deal. It's on YouTube and there's a web page for it, but it's Andrew Rogers and we'll link it in, but you can put in the point where your battery is going to be. And then it'll tell you all the little tiny numbers that you couldn't really read. It'll tell you how far off it'll be from the actual true tempo.
In seconds
And I guess it does it when I did it, I just knew it
or
was a certain
BPM or
fraction. Yeah, beats per minute kind of behind. Of course, I guess that would depend too on how fast you were going.
sure,
You know,
sure.
if you went 30 beats per minute on some kind of weird ballad versus
Regardless, it's a good
170.
ratio to check out of
Yeah,
what
but for
what
a director, it was a good tool for me because I could just go. Oh,
Okay.
then I could make my
So let
lesson
me
plan for it.
I'm not trying to make it more confusing. I'm trying to understand. Backfield drum majors. Pointless?
They're only needed when the band turns around and faces backfield
Okay.
because no one's watching them until then, you know. And in fact, if you have part of the band facing backfield, most cases they need to be listening to the battery and the band and not following necessarily the backfield drum major. But we always have them keep conducting for two important reasons. One, it looks like they're doing something. Okay. So they're not just standing there. And
Right.
plus, there might be a time we need them on front field.
Right.
You know, someone's sick, someone has COVID, we need to move them up front. But they are important because when the whole band turns around, then all that timing, all the rules invert. So it makes
Okay.
sense because now that's
Yeah.
our front sideline.
Right.
That's not the back sideline anymore. That's the front sideline. So now we got to figure out how do we make this work so when we turn back around, we're still with the front ensemble that's closest to the press box.
So I think that the onus then goes on to that backside drum major because visually they can see the front the head drum major,
Hmm.
and we've already said that the speed of light is fast enough. You can pretty much stay with that person
Right.
all the time, but you have to teach them what they're listening for.
Yes.
Good.
And in rehearsal, the backfield drum major should be exactly with your Met because the Met's always backfield.
That makes sense.
You never put your Met on the front field. So they just stay with the metronomes. They get kind of a instilled sense of time.
Just
You
to
know, they kinda
reemphasize that point, your metronome should always be
Yes.
Mike Lunney.
Yeah. Well, by just the world in general. But I've
Right.
gone to certain clinics and stuff where they'll have the metronome at the front of the field. And I'm like, this isn't going to work. Or I had a clinic just the other day where the band director kept trying to count with them when they were playing, but we were up on top of the press box. So in his ears, he was counting exactly with the band. In the band's ears, he was a half beat behind. So they heard 1 1, click 1, click 2,
Right.
click 3, click 4. And I had to tell him, said, quit counting. don't count with the band. We're too far from them. Unless you're on the field, you can't count with. Even if you're on the field, I wouldn't count with the band.
Right.
The band has to count. Okay, they have to count, and so we've got to remember that as directors. Don't try to count with your band. Um, don't have the drum majors start with whistles unless it's military and we're kind of put all together and that's really cool. But if it's a spread out show, a core style show, that's never going to work. They just have to do it by giving the beat. Then the percussion pick up that part or the band. And then the drum major of all things, most people don't, it's hard to get sometimes for directors to understand this, but the drum major follows the drum line. The drum line does not follow the drum major. The drum line drives the bus. Okay. Uh-oh, got a
Time out.
timeout signal.
Say that again. I
Okay, the
thought
drum
your
major
drum
does
major
not control
controlled
the tempo.
everything. I thought they
No, they
controlled
start the
everything.
tune. They can start the tempo, but you cannot expect a drum line to fluctuate at 160 beats a minute to the whims of the drum major. If they slow down or speed up, they've just got 1,000 notes. They can't do it. So my drum majors, they watch the sticks and the feet of the snare, and they just direct according to that.
So
They
your
just watch
center
the battery.
snare is probably going to dictate your tempo.
Yes, you better pick a good center snare because if they fluctuate, the drum line will listen to the center and they will fluctuate with their center snare because that's their leader. And then all of a sudden the band is like a whiplash.
Right.
And the band's trying to play along with that, but then it exaggerates in that whiplash thing.
Man, I like learning. This is
Yeah,
good.
there's a lot of stuff going on that people don't even realize, and that's why it is hard to do because that's why bands fail at it. And two other things to kind of shoot out there. One is kids generally have tempo problems, and I hate to say this, it's because they're trying to be too musical. So they take it upon themselves to, well, we're the trumpet section or we're the brass over here on the side. And man, this is really beautiful and rubato. We can just slow down here. Man, this is gorgeous. Meanwhile, the woodwinds are falling down because it's like, where'd the tempo go?
Right.
So usually it's not we're just going to do it bad on purpose. But it's like we have to be musical, but inside the box of the physics we're given. We're on a
Okay.
field 100 yards, 153 yards wide, and that's just the field.
Right.
Then you've got the whole stadium around you. So we've got to have these rules. And if we want to do it rubato and we want to slow down, we better talk about that.
Right.
We better all figure out exactly how much we're going to slow down on that.
Okay. So again, my oversimplistic brain here, help me out. A lot of this, I don't want to say trial and error, but there's some experimentation that needs to happen to figure out who you're listening to, where, or to give them time to figure that out.
Yes,
Is that
that's
a better
fair.
way to say it?
And then to really figure it out, you need to have a trusted student or a staff member that if you're not sure of the field timing, have that person stand behind that section of the band and then play through that portion of the show. And then when you finish that portion, go, were these kids playing right in time with the battery, or were they watching the drum major? Figure it out. It takes some questions, and they'll say no, they were exactly with the battery and the drum major because we're in the safe zone. And then we can figure out, okay, that's going to work then. Or they'll say, no, actually, from listening to the band, we're about a half beat behind. Okay, so the drum major on that side needs to conduct ahead of the beat.
I
That'll blow
get
your
it.
mind.
I
And
get
then
it.
that section of the band has to watch that drum major.
So the other thing I'm taking away from this is your drum majors better not be a popularity contest. You need to put some kids up there that can think, that have a sense of I can conduct ahead of the beat.
Yeah. Yeah, because that's a really interesting skill in itself. If you've
Yeah.
never had to do that,
I,
to
I
direct ahead of
wasn't
the
trying to
beat.
make that off topic. I'm just saying
No, no, that's a good point.
you're when you have drum major auditions next spring, maybe factor some of that in. Can you conduct ahead of the beat? I don't know. Just thinking.
Yeah. And you're right. The general rules of the battery is behind the winds. The center drum major should conduct to what they see the battery doing, and the winds listen to the battery.
Right.
That works 99% of the time because if you've got a good drill writer, they'll write it to where that'll happen. You don't have your big, huge
Aha.
separation side to side. So make sure you tell your drill writer, beg or find a different drill writer,
Fair to say.
if they won't do it. Because they'll do things like they say, well, the Blue Coats did that. Yeah, sure they did. Their average
Right.
age is 20 and a half. And they just
Maybe
paid $6,000 to be here.
a good question when you're hiring somebody is talk to me about field timing.
Yeah.
Have
And
you
in
got
fact,
that
that could
factored
be a
in?
whole nother podcast, but what you need to tell your drill writer. There's a whole set of rules that I've come up with from mistakes we've made that said, we want it this way and we want it this
Right.
way. And make sure you work as a team. You're not telling them necessarily what to do, but we are a team. And then they'll say, well, what about this? Okay, we can do that.
I might
Okay, now, but
argue
don't
with
do
you there.
this.
You are paying them to do it.
We are, but we're creative individuals.
We're all
You,
creatives. I get
yeah,
it.
you
But
can't put a drill writer in a box and say, you will do as I say because I'm giving you a check. Because they'll tell you, I've got other bands I can write for.
say that aren't near as picky as you.
And there's times my drill writer has first world problems here. My drill writer, my drill writer's come up with something, and I'm thinking, he sends the drill, and I go, I'm not sure if we get this blah blah blah. And I'd like it this way, and he'd go, the drill writer will say something like, well, remember I'm the chef, and you're eating at the table. Trust me. So this will
Okay.
work. And it does work. You know what I mean? It's like, oh my gosh, it did work. We learned it
Right.
and it worked. So there's a certain amount of trust and creative trust.
Sure,
Of
but
course, that's off kind of off on a tangent, but it's
even us having
important
this
as well.
conversation reminds me that there are those that still have to write their own drill.
Yeah, there are.
So you have to think about these things. This is good for you.
Yeah, yeah. You have to figure out if it works for you. So that's kind of that first one. The second one is basically if the percussion, like a percussion feature, if they're in front of the winds, like it's front ensemble on the front sideline, battery, then the winds, then the drum major has to actively conduct ahead of the drum line.
Okay.
And the woodwind and brass watch the drum major, and all those tennis balls will hit at the same time.
Well, I've
So
seen
we,
smaller classifications that they don't necessarily have a marching battery. Everybody's parked right at the front. So
yeah,
that would be all the time for them.
and I would say with that point, I would never do that.
Okay.
I would, I think that's a terrible mistake. Put bass drums, tenor drums, snare drums in the front ensemble on the front sideline. I always try to convince them to put them on the hash and then put all the band in front of them and just park them out there. And it's no problem parking the battery percussion. Just don't dare put your snare and bass drums and everything on the front sideline and expect your band to play in time because they're going to play according to the percussion. Then their tennis balls will be launched late
Right.
every single time. It's just going to be this, and they get used to hearing it. And then you're in the press box going, nothing in this show is together. And
Right.
it's because the director chose to put everybody on the front sideline.
And once you create a habit or once you create this is what I'm used to, it's really hard to break it.
Yeah. And even as a director, we get ear deaf,
Yeah.
ear blind, I guess is the better term, ear blind. We hear it enough times, we start to think it's right,
Right.
and then they go to contest and it's like, this isn't right because now the stadium's a lot bigger and they're further away from their band. And now all of a sudden it's real obvious that it's wrong. Um,
As the
so
musical philosophers Molly Hatchet said, you're flirting with disaster.
flirting with disaster. I'll just be real blunt. It's stupid.
Okay, then there you go.
It's really stupid to put everything on the front sideline. All the front ensemble you want, put them on the front sideline, it'll work. But do not put your battery percussion on the front sideline. Park them on the front hash, or if it's a bigger band, on the back hash. Small band, put out those big giant flats for props. It
Yeah.
stages the area. All of a sudden, we got this beautiful little stage, and the band looks bigger, and they play together.
There you
In fact,
go.
that's the easiest solution in a small band is just put all that percussion in one spot, and then you never have to worry about the rules changing.
And stage around them. Yeah.
Yeah, the old Barry Hurt mantra said for a small band, stay inside the 30s, front sideline to the front hash. That's all we march. That's it. Put up props, put the percussion right there. We're done. And I promise you, your field timing will always be good.
And there's no rule that says you have to not do that.
No, and for a little bit of time, I guess for a year or so, people were judges were kind of, I don't know about this, kind of thing. And then, when you have one snare player and one tenor drummer, and you have like one kid that plays four bass drums on a big giant rack,
Got it?
you don't want to march those kids,
Right.
and it brings up so many more advantages. I've worked with bands that are smaller groups that do park their percussion on the front side, or excuse me, front hash or the back hash. And then during the ballad, the kid can play marimba. Then they can come back and they can play snare drum. And then they can play
Right.
auxiliaries and they can play gong. So it's like having a concert percussion section on the field, which we all know in today's day and time, the more we sound like a concert band, the more pleasing it is to our adjudicators.
There
They
you
don't want
go.
to hear the 1970s Spirit of Atlanta. And
Doing your quiet part out loud again.
yeah, but right or wrong, that's what we want to hear, and that's what we're tasked to hear in the rubric, is that it's more of a concert band with a little extra steroid. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? And it does not. We don't want that Spirit of Atlanta sound, and we loved it during the time, but it's you can make that happen by parking your percussion. And a lot of them, I would say, don't use a marching snare drum for field timing because a marching snare drum all by itself sounds wrong.
Huh.
You're used to hearing them in a group. A
Right.
concert snare sounds right. Just put a concert snare and a concert bass drum.
Is it the
And just,
pitch? Is it the
I think part of it's the pitch, part of it's just what we're used to hearing. You hear
right?
that whack. You know what I mean? It just has such a power to it that it just sounds intrusive. Where a concert snare drum, even tuned to almost the same pitch, is not quite as intrusive to the ear. It sounds
Okay.
correct. It sounds
Okay.
correct to the audience.
Yeah, I get to trust you on that one because I haven't
Yeah.
done it.
Yeah. And kind of went off on a tangent from field timing, but it's still within field timing, you
Sure.
know. And when you do all this, you reap the benefits of improved timing. The kids don't feel like they're wrong when they hear something that doesn't match their brain. They understand why it's happening, you know, and and also they'll play better. Watch out in your band. Make sure that when you do fundamentals that everybody is counting.
Okay.
Don't let pockets of people not count, or one kid count really loud for all the brass and everyone else just kind of barely count. Everyone has to count close to the same volume, because if you don't, we'll develop what I call pulse pockets, where all of a sudden this one kid with his 30 followers will get ahead of the band because that one kid's speeding up. Where if everybody counts, that doesn't usually happen. You know, if you have these kids counting on side one and on side two, and the kids in the middle don't count, then the tempo starts to phase.
Right.
You know, and that's usually what happens is tempo phasing, tearing of tempo, whatever you want to call it, is usually caused by individuals not playing
Okay.
more so than individuals playing because they can't hear the other people because they're not playing their part. They just got to
Right.
memorize their parts.
Oh, man, you got me swimming today. I'm just gonna have to go back and
Well,
listen again.
it is a hard technique. It really is.
Okay. Well, you got anything else we need to know?
No, just number one, keep the metronome behind the band. Number two, get your rear end off the deer blind and get down there on the field and listen to what's happening and then adjust as necessary.
So,
And that's really, if you water it all down, that's what it is. Because they'll sit there and go, well, I see the drum major and this sounds different. Let's fix this.
because I have to tell you,
Fix it.
one of the things that I was always afraid of going through my music education program is that I was never going to develop the ear I needed, even in a concert situation, to go, oh, wait a minute, I hear something wrong. If it sounded mostly, who was it, Bill Wood, that said you can just turn kids loose and they'll get a third division
Yeah.
because they'll figure
Your
it out.
average, intelligent, middle class, intelligent kid, you just do the show enough times in a row and they'll be a solid third division.
But
Sometimes even a two. You have to teach them into a one
this
or
still
teach them into a
feels
five.
this still feels overwhelming to me to go, how do you just dive in and you get it? Or you reach out to Bachman and Rogers and the other people.
Yeah, you do it ahead of time. Yeah, play
what I
that
mean,
video
though.
for them. Yeah, and figure it out in your drill. You can figure out by looking in your drill that this is going to be a timing problem before I even teach the drill, and anticipate it. So you teach the kids from the get-go, this is what we're going to do right here.
So, but this is what's going to make my brain feel better, okay?
Okay.
And you can laugh at me if you want to. If you can tell me that the rules of physics on this are finite, that the fixes are always going to be essentially the same. You have different environments, you have different configurations of your band, but the rules to fix is always going to be do this, do this, do this, and do this
I agree with that.
within the parameter. It's not like you have to every single time go, oh gosh, now we have, a variable that we've never experienced before. It's all about geometry. That's what it
Yeah.
sounds like.
Yeah.
And it's about the ability to not ignore what your ears, not
Or
ignore
to
what your ears
ignore.
telling you, and then teach them how to ignore a different voice.
Yes. When to ignore and when not to ignore. Yeah.
So it is doable.
Yeah. And then once you teach it to them, it doesn't change because that's that same set in the show.
Right.
So it's not like we're going to change it Tuesday because we did it this way Monday. It's going to be, no, this is how we're doing it. You're going to ignore the bass drums and you're going to listen to the clarinets, or you're going to watch the front drum major, or you're going to, whatever the case might be, then it stays the same. So it's not like this ongoing process of changing, you know.
It's not like you're having to analyze and guess what the actual problem is. You can look and go, that's that way because of where you are relative to the percussion and or the press box.
Yes.
Okay. I got all that. Stadium change things?
It does a little bit, but I almost never address that with the kids. We just do what works to the press box, and we try to ignore the rest. The one stadium that's really tricky for a lot of bands, including mine, is the Alamo Dome or state marching contest, because
Because
there's
it's
a lot of
inside
weird.
or
It's inside, yeah. So you hear in the upper level deck, whatever you do on the field does that whoosh 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 whoosh
right.
whoosh, and you hear that constantly. It's just like a distracting sound above your head. And then so you have to really train the kids, stick to the rules we did, ignore the whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. Also, in a dome like that or any field now with a video board, don't allow the kids to watch the video board
Right,
because
right, right,
at the
right, right.
Alamo Dome they'll watch show the drum major and the kid will be like, "Oh, I can just use that." No, that's behind.
Right. All right,
That's
right.
just but they don't know that. And at the school I taught at for 19 years, we had a indoor rehearsal area that was really for athletics, but it had a little tiny football field, and we couldn't march our show on it. But I'll tell you a secret about that place. It sounds just like the Alamo Dome.
Oh wow.
I don't know
Okay.
why, but it does the whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. You turn on the big fans and then you play in there and you get up against one wall and you hear the echo go back and forth and the percussion playing. And it sounds just like the Alamo Dome. So we'd get in there and practice. So that's exactly what it's going to sound like on that Monday morning. So
Okay.
they'd get in there and they'd come off the field going, "Hey, it was exactly like being in the doghouse." We called it the doghouse,
Right.
And so figure out a place to go to where maybe you can make that happen.
A little
Play in a
context
gym.
for everybody. They were the Bulldogs. So
Yeah. Yeah.
so the
Kind of like,
doghouse was
yeah.
because of Bulldogs, not because of so fundamentals is horn carriage, is angle towards the press box.
Yeah. Because they're very directional. So they need to understand that those horns all have to be at 10 degrees above level or 20 degrees above level, or our box level is all the bells up at 45 degrees, pointed straight towards the front sideline or to the box. Okay. Or what's our focal point? How far do the horns turn in? Because those things are extremely directional.
Right.
You know,
And it
you
becomes
you've felt that.
it's this is the last thing I'm gonna, because I could talk a long time. You know me. But I also think, when you're teaching intonation, the
Hmm.
waves, when you're out of tune, and then when it locks, there's almost a physical reaction in the body that goes, "Whew, there it is."
Yeah.
I almost think phasing does the same thing. It's very uncomfortable until you know what it feels like, and because I believe it is a physical thing. It's not just a mental exercise. It's not just learning what to ignore. There's a feeling that you learn, and when it doesn't feel right, you go, "This doesn't feel right." You might not be able to analyze exactly what that was. Agree, disagree. This is right. What you're hearing right now, that was right. Do that again until the muscle memory and or ear memory and or whatever memory you want to
Yeah.
attach to
But
it.
the big difference is, though, when you play in tune correctly, you immediately have gratification.
Right, right, right.
If you're playing in time to the press box, you know in your brain that this is exactly right, but you're hearing other people playing early or late.
Sure.
That's hard. It's
But I
like telling
think
someone I want us two to play in tune. Meanwhile, the flutes are a half step apart, but they're right next to us. Now let's play in tune. It's the same
yeah,
concept. We'd never do that in tuning.
but I do think that the brain is such a fascinating mechanism that when we learn what should be going on, you can say to yourself before Mr. Lunney ever says it, I can already tell you that we need to play with this, and this is what it's going to sound like in my head.
Yes.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah.
It's a skill that can be taught.
Yeah. You learn what's right.
And all this is to go back to my poor overthinking. I'll never get it. Never. It can be taught. You
Yeah.
guys, your group can get it.
And the big general rules, make sure your drill is written correctly,
Right.
even if you have to change it. Okay, make sure you use a backfield metronome. That'll all this discussion is fun and I enjoy it, but 90% of the problems are those two things. Just the drill is wrong.
You and your backfield metronome.
That's right. That's how I wake up in the morning. I have a it's on the
Backfield.
back, it's behind me and it clicks. And then I come up out of bed and I go take a shower. That's my wake up in the morning is click, 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 click.
All right. Well, I think that's probably enough to get us thinking. If you have questions, Mike will answer them on this very subject.
That's
Ask
right.
Mike at intunemusic.com. We're glad to help any way we can. So,
Or send me a video,
yeah. Or a
audio video
would a recording
presentation
work?
and I can figure it out.
Cool. All right, brother. Man, I hope you have a great week.
I've got to. I have no choice.
That's where we are. And I'll talk to you again soon, friend.
All right, sounds good.
All right, buddy. Stay in
Bye.
phase.
That's right. Walking step, whatever.